mean, you're doing. We are live right now. We're going to give a couple of minutes for people to come and join in, and then we're going to start our conversation. Thank you for being here. All right. Welcome everybody for this, our third in a series, Mountada Debate. Mountada Debate is part of the effort that the Syrian Forum, USA, is attempting to communicate things related to Syria in an analytical, calm, and reasonable tone. We're trying to look at aspects of the huge and momentous and historic transition that Syria is undergoing currently, ever since the fall of the Assad regime on December the 7th, 2024, obviously. We are hosts. I'm very glad, very honored, and incredibly happy to be graced by the presence of two strong, independent, leading ladies living in the United States, working on all things related to the Middle East and Syria. I'm very happy to welcome علياء Nطfجي of the Syrian Alliance, Syrian American Alliance for Peace and Prosperity. Thank you for accepting this. I just wanted to make sure that I make it known to everyone who's watching this today that this is your first public appearance in such a capacity. So we're very, very thankful. Very, very thankful that you accepted to do this. Obviously, Caroline Rose is a feisty, independent voice of reason on all things Syria as well. I'm going to ask you ladies to address the public and tell a thing or two about yourselves, what you do. And then we're going to go ahead and go break into our discussion and deep dive into U.S.-Syrian relations. The title of this episode is, Will the Honeymoon Be Durable? But we're going to go underneath the hood and try to kind of parse this, separate all the elements, and discuss them together in a manner that helps maybe shed some light, add some new information, or give a critical understanding of certain aspects of that. First of all, علياء, if you might just introduce yourself, what you do, and then we're going to go to Caroline. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jamal, and hello, Caroline. I'm علياء Nطfجي, the Executive Director of Syrian American Alliance for Peace and Prosperity. ever since the inception of SAP back in January, after the fall of the regime. We gathered a group of amazing Syrian individuals from all different backgrounds and professions, and all who've had tremendous experience in advocacy and efforts in lifting sanctions, putting sanctions, anything that helped the Syrian people. We decided to create a bigger advocacy group. After the fall of the regime, many people surfaced on the ground. As you might know, Jamal, a bit of some people back in the days when they were advocating for Syria, they were afraid to do so publicly. So a lot of them were doing it behind closed doors, behind screens. But after the fall of the regime, everyone decided to come out in public and do it publicly. So our group of advocates now on the ground is much larger. And that's why SAP came about. We have 15 board members, 35 advisory board members, and we have been advocating for the lift of sanctions ever since the fall of the regime. I am of a Lebanese Syrian background. I'm half Lebanese, half Syrian. I migrated to the US in 1997. I studied political science in Baltimore, Maryland, and then I moved to
Poli-sci represents.
Yes, and then I moved to New York after getting married, and I have 3 kids. Right now I live in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I have 3 kids, and I am married to a Syrian physician from Idlib that studied abroad in Germany. And I don't think he's watching me right now. He's on a plane back from Syria to the US. And I thank you for having me, Jamal.
Thank you again, Alia. It's an honor to host you. Such an interesting person with such a diverse set of experiences and a background, and putting your money where your mouth is. You worked on this, like from the ground up. So thank you for gracing us with your presence. Caroline, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Jamal, for having me on. And thank you so much to the Syrian Forum for having me on this episode, as well as putting this whole initiative together. I think that so many can agree that as we are seeing a new Syria emerge and all of these challenges that the new administration and Syrians have had to face in terms of fragmentation and trying to find unity, it's dialogues like this that are so incredibly important, bringing different voices to the table and really talking about the challenges that the country is facing, highlighting and really shining a light on new different perspectives. I think that is so incredibly important. So thank you so much for creating this platform, as well as for having me on. I really appreciate it. So a bit about me. I am a director over at the Newlines Institute for Strategy and Policy, which is a Washington, D.C. based think tank where I direct and generate research on illicit economies, crime, defense, and security in the Middle East, with a very special focus on the Levant, specifically Syria. I've been working on Syria for years. I have no familial connections. This has been really something that has become a passion and a love by just the friendships and the partnerships I've been able to create with so many Syrians, especially Syrian American researchers and activists and civil society leaders. This past year, just with all of the changes, I've been able to go to Syria for the first time, which has been incredibly eye-opening and just wonderful to finally get to know a place I have been conducting work on for the last few years. My work primarily focuses on illicit economies, such as the catch-gun trade and drug flows inside of Syria. This past year has been eye-opening with now this transition from the regime that, of course, adopted industrial-scale production over drug flows now to this drug bust counter-narcotics approach. I also look at U.S. foreign policy, security, and defense policy in Syria, so very closely looking at the U.S. withdrawal process in the Northeast, as well as all of the different political changes we've seen between the United States and Syria in the last year. So it's wonderful to be with you, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for, again, gracing us with your presence. I just wanted to highlight how lucky we are to have both of you ladies, because you bring your skill sets. We're talking about two individuals, irrespective of gender here, who are very well versed into this. And then I hate the tokenism of, well, representativeness, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact that you are two ladies carrying a perspective that is very unique with your unique set of experiences on the ground, working behind the scenes, but also in front of everyone as well, at least for a year with SAP, but also for you, Caroline. This is an important indication of the role and the importance of Syrian women specifically, but women in general, in what relates to all things Syria. And we are here to basically thank you for you as two individuals coming to this, but also thank behind you all the Syrian women who are doing amazing work. And in that case, I just want to, in between brackets, do a personal thing for the Mountada debates. I want to shout out to Tasneem Hito, who's organizing all of this, who is an unstoppable force. Salah as well, thank you very much on the technical side of things. Okay, Alia, I wanted to start with you, but since Caroline whet my appetite, I want to ask you, since you're an expert on illicit economies, Keptagon, just as a starter, tell me, because in my eyes, it couldn't be a bigger, starker difference. To me, it sounds like it's night and day. Yeah. Am I delusional, or has there been a very seminal change since December 7? And if, in that case, in what sense? On what scale are we talking? Is there still a Keptagon trade? And how are relations with the surrounding environment on that specific level?
Yes, thank you. I think actually when we look at the drug issue inside of Syria, it's actually an interesting prism or lens into essentially assessing the appetite for change with this new administration. And I have to say, having studied this, having closely examined how the regime positioned themselves behind and in and around the Captagon trade, which is, for those who don't know Captagon, it's an amphetamine type stimulant that the regime adopted industrial scale sponsorship behind in the late stages of the regime right before its collapse in December. And I think that what we've seen since December, quite literally starting on December 8th, when al-Shara took to the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus and made this kind of pledge for counter-narcotics a key element of this new government, and said that he was seeking to purify Syria and essentially take off this reputation, this international reputation for drug production on an industrial scale. And since then, we've seen at least 5 large-scale lab busts in Syria, over 220 million pills seized by the new administration. Sorry, 220 billion pills within Syria, large stockpiles of Captagon pills. Yes.
220 billion pills.
Yes.
In terms of weight, because the number sounds astronomical. What are we talking about in terms of tonnage, for example? Like, give or take, ballpark.
I take that back. Actually, it's million. And thank you for asking, Jamal. I accidentally said billion. It's million. Over 220 since the fall of the regime in December 2024. Yes, this was compiled, by the way, by the Newlines Institute Captagon trade seizure database that we keep at the Institute. This is all open source. There are likely other seizures as well that are not captured in the open source. And this, by the way, is night and day to what we saw before the fall of the Assad regime, where there were no laboratory busts whatsoever, even though we had evidence that laboratories were inside of Syria, because the regime wanted to create this mirage and this narrative that Syria was only a transit country, not an origin site for Captagon. And I think that looking at how this new government has changed with the very little resources and the staffing that they have available, and they've conducted a very, I think, successful counter-narcotics campaign, finding the physical sites, finding the storage houses, and also pursuing individuals like Wassim Badi al-Assad, Ahmed al-Sheikh, even members of the Zaiter family in neighboring Lebanon. And they've been pursuing these networks, disrupting them, conducting arrests. I think that that is a sign that should be taken, with grains of salt, should be taken in conjunction with other elements as a sign that this new administration is serious about changing and is serious about moving forward. Because there was an assumption right after the regime fell that maybe this new organization, which we were not very familiar with, could continue this illicit drug trade, which was worth at least $10 billion annually, taken, in scale across the region. And instead, they've rejected it. And that is an alternative revenue stream that could help stave the effect of sanctions. But they have taken some serious measures against and in disrupting this illicit trade.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you for this, Caroline. This is a good piece of information. We will get back to that in a rotund kind of way right now in a sec. Adia, thank you again for doing this today. I just need to highlight how busy your schedule is. You're going to go to New York like yesterday, like really quick. So thank you for making the time for us today. You have a busy week of meetings, of activities, of being somewhere and doing things. So first of all, I'm going to start on a personal note and ask you one question, and then I'm going to ask you about the week ahead. What is SAP doing basically in New York? So first of all, we've all watched the Syrian flag being flown above the embassy yesterday. My question to you is your personal feelings as a Syrian American, as a Syrian, of seeing this. What does it mean in the grander scheme of things in like a couple of sentences? And then tell us about the week ahead for SAP. And I'm assuming other organizations as well. You can't speak for other organizations, but it's going to be a big hodgepodge of Syrian American community activism and activity around the UNGA. So your feelings of what it means for the Syrian flag to be flown above the Washington embassy, and then what's ahead for the week? Where are you focusing? Thank you.
Thank you, Jamal. Well, the raising of the flag on the Syrian embassy, I cannot tell you how ecstatic I am. It was a surreal moment. It's definitely a proud moment. The Syrians have been waiting for this for quite a while now. As you've seen, the embassy has been deserted for a few years, and it looks like it's been neglected and in ruins. But hopefully, we are going to see it reopen. Raising the flags on the Syrian embassy today in DC is a positive sign, most definitely. That means to us, that means that the U.S. is doing a great job engaging diplomatically and reopening that channel between Syria and the U.S. government after being, shut for so many years. And this means normal life for Syrians, back to normal, back to business, passport renewals, documents. We've had to live without passports for a few years, expired documents that we couldn't renew. So it's a big step for this for the embassy to reopen, and it's definitely a great moment and a proud moment to feel. As far as our few days coming up in New York, they are compact. We're gonna attend the Concordia Summit. We have a few side events, one with Syrian Forum, one with MEI, Charles Lister.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. And tomorrow, hopefully, the Syrian president is going to meet with the Syrian American community around 5 p.m. to address us. We're also gonna we're gonna have a quiet celebration for him on Wednesday. He's gonna speak in front of the UNGA, in front of the UN General Assembly. So we are all excited. We know it's gonna be chaotic, but the Syrian president hasn't been to the US in ages, and over a decade. So to us, this is an incredible moment. It's surreal, and it's as wonderful as the regime falling. I mean, we've had quite the year, from the fall of the regime to President Trump calling off the sanctions. We've had a roll of wonderful and positive events happening, and we're hoping that it would be finished off with the lift of sanctions fully. You know, we are hoping that what President Trump has requested and promised is fully implemented in Congress, because as of right now, it's still not fully implemented. And we are hoping—
Which opens the question, Alia, if I may interject here. We've heard about Senator Lindsey Graham and another member of the Senate. I can't remember the name for the life of me.
Van Hollen, yes.
Van Hollen. Basically spearheading a move to kind of sort of block or obstruct or keep some strings attached. So maintain the body of the sanctions set up by the legislative arm of the US government, because the executive arm has basically banished, like lifted and kind of disappeared the entire body structure of sanctions that it had imposed. But Senator Graham is trying to maintain that and then suspend pending behavior change and kind of like stick and carrot type of incentives for the Syrian government.
Yes.
What is your position as part of SAP? Specifically SAP, not as a Syrian American right now. I'm talking as someone who's got a skin in this game. What is your position towards that? What has been done or is being done or will be done by the Syrian American community to try and unblock this, do you think?
Yes. Senator Graham and Van Hollen are planning on introducing a bill, I believe, next week, possibly. It's ironic. Amendment SA 3889 to the NDAA, and if adopted, it would severely undermine every effort to suspend sanctions on Syria, the Caesar sanction, by tying the relief to a set of rigid and politically driven conditions. This amendment, if it passes, it would undo the progress and block the path forward to us. What we are trying to do as SAP and as members is call, send letters, reach out to every rep we've dealt with before. That's part of what we do as advocates. We engage with our congressmen.
Good old advocacy and lobbying.
Right. We call them out on it. We plead, and we hope that they wouldn't, move forward with it. That's basically what we do on a daily basis.
Thank you, Alia. So, Caroline, I want to piggyback off what was being said right now and throw the ball in your court. Why is Senator Graham all of a sudden very interested in reinstating or keeping or maintaining these sanctions in place? What woke him up from this long slumber, you think? There is, again, if you know Syrians, you know how much we love a good conspiracy theory. There's an alphabet soup of conspiracy theories that is flying around on everything and anything. One of the more persistent kind of rumors, not so rumors, is that the AIPAC is playing a game of footsie with part of the MAGA populace in the Beltway, in the halls of Congress to kind of sort of stifle that progress. Now, how crazy a conspiracy theory kind of questioning is this? Is there any kind of traction to this? Second, could there be anything that comes out of this? How serious is this move? Is this kind of like political capital that is kind of like just pushing buttons so that they can get, better conditions? And then 3, there is this talk about an Israel-Syria moment happening sometime around this visit. This kind of signature is floating in the air. There's an agreement that's going to be signed, etc. Is this part of the effort to extract better terms from the Syrians, or is this something of a different beast, if it exists at all, that has a life of its own? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's kind of interesting, right? Because on just yesterday, we have the raising of the Syrian flag, the new Syrian revolutionary flag at the embassy. We had pictures of Shaibani in the U.S. Congress halls, with people like Senator Lindsey Graham, who introduced this bill along with a number of other bipartisan counterparts. And I think that what this shows is, while we're seeing, as the kind of the theme of this discussion today, we have this honeymoon in U.S.-Syria relations, there are some undertones, some deep undertones that we are seeing emerge that very much could spoil this honeymoon period in 2026 and beyond. For some context, this is an amendment to the 2026 National Defense Authorization Act, otherwise called the NDAA, which is essentially understood as a must-pass bill because it authorizes essentially funding the United States military for the next year and paying salaries for U.S. officers and soldiers. So as a result,
where does the sanctions law belong in the NDAA? Why is it in this package? Just explain this in very quick terms.
It's a great question. And I think that what we see every year, the NDAA, because it always is, there's so much pressure to pass this bill. We have so many different additions that have nothing to do with refunding and refinancing and supporting U.S. defense. And so as a result, we see,
if you want something passed, you put it to ride the coattails of the must-pass bill that cannot be failed.
Exactly.
So you just stick it in and it passes along, even if it has nothing to do with NDAA.
It's a very, I don't want to say a modern phenomenon, but at least in the last 20 years, we've seen now the NDAA as seen as one of the few vehicles to pass legislative initiatives. Which is very unfortunate and points to a lot of gridlock within the U.S. Congress and a number of other political issues. And this is also why we've seen so many other initiatives on Syria that have been introduced as a bill on the floor of the U.S. Congress, then reworked as an amendment to the 2026 NDAA or previous NDAAs. For example, our work on, the Captagon Act and the Captagon, the Anti-Captagon Suppression Act, also introduced on the House floor, but then reworked into amendments. And we've seen that so much with sanctions initiatives and efforts to pressure the Assad regime. And what this shows really, and at this time, ironically, as Shaibani is in Washington, D.C., as we're seeing al-Shara prepare to go to New York for the UNGA, we're seeing now this fracturing in the consensus around sanctions. In April, Trump set a very drastically changed pathway for U.S.-Syria relations, announced that the United States was going to offer Syria this new start. And so far, there has been general consensus, some doubt expressed, but general consensus with that pathway until recently. And I think that it's for 2 reasons. Number one, I think there still is on both sides of the aisle some hesitation about the history of this new administration, specifically with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS. There is this question of, can someone really change? can al-Shara truly change? Going from Jolani to al-Shara within just a matter of a few weeks. We've seen this rebranding, this different persona, and I think that there are a few members in Congress that have hesitation, and they're trying to look at the history of HGS, their historical ties with al-Nusra, and measure that with just really a few months of drastic change in Syria. And then the second element, I think, is very much influence from Israel. And from what I've understood, talking to civil society organizations, talking to people on the Hill over the last week, it actually doesn't seem to be as much of influence from AIPAC, but actually Israel, the Israeli government themselves. As we've seen now negotiations between Netanyahu or between Israeli officials and Syrian officials over the security situation in southern Syria in Sueda. And I think this is very much a negotiation tactic. It's also a way for Israel to demonstrate, as they've done over, strikes against Iran, over the situation and negotiations over Gaza. It's a way of them demonstrating that they have the ability to influence congressional representatives and change the course of U.S. policy despite the U.S. president setting a precedent. And that is a way of leverage. And I think that really shows this very complex dynamic where we're seeing both factions of both sides of the aisle support this resistance and this slowing down of sanctions relief and repeal efforts against Syria. And I agree with Ali in the sense that, this is a risk to stabilization and recovery efforts in Syria. We are now approaching this year mark with this new government, and I think a lot of Syrians are hoping and expecting certain measures of sanctions relief to be underway. That has to happen through the full repeal of Caesar. And if we don't get there by December, we could start to see this system unravel a bit.
Excellent way to end this, because I will piggyback off of that as well and go to Aliyah. Caroline was saying Syrian Americans and Syrians expect. And then she put a sentence in front of that. I'm just going to take, sorry, Caroline, that sentence out and then allow you to fill in the blanks. Aliyah, as a Syrian American, as a Syrian woman specifically, is there anything that is related to women's rights, for example, et cetera, et cetera? But what do you want out of the United States now? What do you want out of the United States in a year's time? What do you want out of the United States in the coming decade? And in terms of actionable, not just because we're very good at flowery language, like peace, kumbaya. I don't want any of that, please. Give me actionable, actual requirements that are, sine non quas, that are without which nothing can move for you as Aliyah, but also as part of the Syrian community that is active in and around Washington, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamal, and thank you, Caroline, for raising this. This is very, very important. What we need today, what Syrians need today, is not much. We're not asking for much. We only need a bit of support. The Syrian people have been sidelined for quite a while. For a very long time, the Syrian file has not been a priority in the U.S. And that was disheartening to me. Today, we have a window of opportunity. That honeymoon phase you're talking about, if we can call it that, if it fades without a proper engagement and sustainable investment, this honeymoon phase will turn into a bitter divorce. Poverty in Syria or in any country pushes people into desperation. When families have no food on the table, no electricity, no income, they become easy targets for exploitation. We've seen this before and we're seeing it now. Extremist groups are re-emerging on the ground and turning back to Captagon to fund their operations. they have to. People will turn into illegal trade. People will turn into corrupt ways to find ends meet. All we are asking is a bit of support. The lift of sanction will open the door for massive companies to go and invest in Syria. But those companies, they're not going to jump and invest heavily in Syria on a 180-day temporary relief. If they don't have security on their return, they're not going to invest. They're going to be hesitant. And if people in Syria, after the honeymoon phase and after all these celebrations are worn down, if they don't have a job that earns them income to be able to rebuild what they went back to, they're going to either migrate back again, creating economic burden on neighboring countries like the 10 years we've seen.
Or start a gang.
Or start a gang, or even kill. Some people kill out of poverty. So chaos will emerge, and we don't want this to happen. If the international community, with the support of the US government, leaves this vacuum unfilled, others will fill it, and they're not going to fill it with peace and prosperity. They're going to fill it with something else. So durability of this honeymoon comes from delivery. We need to create jobs, restore electricity. We need to put these people to work. We need to make them busy. If they're not busy, anything is possible. We do not want the US to show up for photo ops or press statements. We want actual meaningful engagement. And we want real support on the ground. I understand the hesitation and the cautious approach they're taking towards the new government, given their past history and affiliation. But unfortunately, we have no other choice but to engage with them. They're the only system in place on the ground. They're the one in control, and we need to extend an arm to them. So far, from what we've seen, they've shown us that they are engaging, they are willing to engage, and that they are open for any kind of support from the US government. So basically what we want is we want the US government to evolve, the US policy to evolve to reflect the realities on the ground. Relief is not even gonna touch it. We need actual meaningful support that actually translates on the ground. That's it.
Thank you, Ali. So, Caroline, I keep ping-ponging between you two. So we're talking here in terms of, to me right now, the big moniker, the big title that we're discussing right now is US-American relations, US-Syrian relations, yes. But we're talking about how important, how relevant in reality, that's for me what filters out of this right now. Is Syria really to the US? Because if you're a Syrian American like Alya, the only funnel that you're looking at right now for US foreign policy is Syria. You're completely into a tunnel vision where all you see out of the universe of options that the United States has is how does it impact Syria? Because that's what you're invested in. I'm invested in that too. You as a non-Syrian, but interested in Syria, observer and active member in kind of looking at things and considering them. Again, you're not part of the US administration. You're like us, kind of interested and invested in this. As an analyst who doesn't have that much of a skin in the game here, tell us Syrians, Syrian Americans and Syrians beyond, in reality, what should our expectations be? Because we're talking also about a president who, yes, has been revolutionary vis-a-vis us as Syrians. Under no other president would have sanctions been lifted this quickly, would have done this transformation? Correct. But we're talking about a shiny metal object kind of attention span of a president who sees something, thinks this is going to be good for me, I'll go for it, and then something else presents itself, I'm going to drop it.
Yep.
As Syrians and as Syrian Americans, this is very dangerous, this attention span. That's number one. And number two, Syria itself, on the list of priorities of of U.S. foreign policy, how important and relevant is it? And if so, on what level and for how long will this become one of the priorities that we're working on right now, if it is?
It's a great question. So I think that the way to look at this, U.S. interests, long-term interests geopolitically, divorced from the Trump administration. Then we add in the kind of personality and the preferences of the Trump administration. So looking at this without Trump in the picture, the interest geopolitically of the United States in Syria, we've now seen a weakened Iran, a weakened Iranian proxy network across the Middle East, the displacement of a very adversarial, horrible regime inside of Syria, and also a historic opportunity that we see once in a generation or two, where you can almost wipe the slate clean and create new opportunity in a country. And, immediately after the regime fell, I think so many, it wasn't just me, thought of, for example, opportunities in post-war Germany, post-war Japan, in the Balkans. We don't get to see opportunities like this often.
May I interject just for a nanosecond so that we can finesse this? I want you to flow with this, but since you mentioned this, aren't we in the post-nation building, spreading democracy kind of era? If this is the kind of era that we're talking about, we don't want to be involved in foreign, we don't want. Tom Barrack certainly spoke as much and wrote and tweeted, about this, emphasizing how much the United States is going to be hands off.
Right.
What you suggest right now seems to be the opposite of that. So please clarify this to me.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the Trump administration comes in. But I do think that still geopolitically, the United States has to recognize that there is a new opportunity, not necessarily to nation build, but to support and provide capacity where it can, because the interest in Syria, from the most transactional standpoint, is to hedge and diversify reliance on Israel as its main proxy in the region. The United States wants to disengage from the Middle East, ensure that there is relative stability, and focus on great power competition in the South China Sea and the greater Pacific region.
Again, this is not the Arab in me.
Yeah.
But please reiterate this couple of sentences that you spoke about, because this, I mean, if I had $1 for every conversation I had with a Syrian in the past 2 years, talking about what the US wants from the region in general, let alone Syria, which is to cut off and kind of disengage, I would have been a billionaire by now. Please repeat this in no unclear terms again, Caroline, please, because it's music to my ears.
The United States wants to disengage from the Middle East. It wants to have an actor, if not two, that it can rely on and in some cases influence as that broker and that inheritor of Middle East security. The Middle East is so incredibly important for trade routes, freedom of navigation, also greater stability in Europe as well as in South Asia. And so as a result, it is incredibly important to U.S. interests, but the United States does not want to deploy forces to engage in these long wars, as we've seen in Iraq, to a degree in northeast Syria. And so as a result, the long-term interest is to disengage, but also to find partners in the region that can act on behalf of U.S. interests. Now, I'm going to add in the Trump element. Personally, Trump wants a Nobel Peace Prize. He wants to engage in transactional deals in the region. He is also trying to add different dimensions to what is happening in Gaza and the negotiations in Gaza. He wants to revive the Abraham Accords. And so as a result, we're seeing the kind of this dance with the new Syrian administration to try and get them to engage with Israel directly. First, trying to put together a peace accord and a ceasefire agreement and a relative agreement in southern Syria, in Dara and Sweda primarily, maybe translate that into something in the Golan, and then tie that into Abraham Accords agreements. I think that we're far off from that end goal for the Trump administration, but that still is an incentive for them to engage with the new Syrian administration. And then secondly, I think that there's also the personal role and the negotiation capacity that Gulf leaders like MBS in Saudi Arabia have over Trump. And I think that when you look at what happened when he visited the GCC, when he was in Riyadh, MBS had 2 hours. And there was also, from what I understood, a phone call from Erdogan. And that's when Trump emerged from that meeting, that 2-hour private meeting with MBS.
Sanctions?
Yeah,
Off.
and it was done, and he went against the grain of many of his advisors that were very cautious about HTS and Ahmed al-Shara, Sebastian Gorka, who is one of the chief leaders within the National Security Council, was very cautious, including many others in the Trump administration that
Real character.
Yeah, exactly. So all of this, I think, is kind of the constellation of how we should see the United States' interest in Syria.
Right.
I am happy to see, though, that the United States is engaging. It's important that we continue to try and encourage that. But it also, I think, demonstrates that while the executive branch has formidable influence and can set the direction of everything, at
Still,
the
there
end
are
of the day,
limitations.
Congress really, really matters. And this can all stop and end if there is congressional opposition to sanctions repeal.
All right. Thank you very much, Caroline. That's a very extensive answer. I thank you for that. And I thank you for reiterating the obvious, which is the United States' entire posture in the Middle East seems to me rearranging the decks and then leaving to other pastures. Which begs the question, really, in that sense, Alia, when we're rearranging the decks, Caroline was suggesting that as a regional security arrangement, part of which obviously in the region as a component right now, the newcomer to the regional playbook is the new Syria, which is still in formation. I think it's still not finished. Troublesome as it is. Following Asweda, which was, if I want to be really kind, a horrible mistake on the part of the new government. A misjudgment, a misstep with all the cascading violence that happened that led to this kind of uneasy balance right now between the central government in Damascus, the interim central government in Damascus, and Sweda province. Israel has certainly benefited from this as leverage in its talks with the Syrian side that seems to need the agreement with Israel much more than the Israelis seem to need it. This is my setup to ask you 2 questions. As a Syrian American, would you be able to swallow an agreement with Israel that seems to look like it's going to be really, really heavy on benefits for the Israelis and less so for the Syrians? Let's leave alone all our hopes and, kind of putting, lipstick on a, what, right? In the end, we're going to be net cost bearers. I don't want to say losers in an arrangement that will happen clearly with U.S. support under favorable conditions, heavily favorable conditions to the Israelis, how would you and Syrians beyond be able to swallow something like that? That's number one. And number two, what do you think, as a Syrian American who's involved, but also what do you think the Syrian government, I'm again, you're not representing the Syrian government. If you were to guess, would be the Syrian government's position vis-a-vis this agreement and beyond? How would they look at it, and how would they try to benefit from it if it happens?
That's a great question too, Jamal. Thank you. Me as a Syrian American and as an individual in general, I believe in human dignity, and I believe in humans in Syria and in Israel and in Lebanon, everywhere. I am in favor of any agreement that would allow the Syrian to start living again. I know this agreement might come with a heavy price, a price that we Syrians do not want to pay. But if that's the road to peace with our neighboring countries, then I don't see why we shouldn't. They're there. They're not going to go anywhere. They're our neighboring country. We need to open a channel between the two of us, and we need to engage. We cannot keep on going, being hostile to each other. The security risk between the two is not good for both countries, not just us, not just to Lebanon, even to Israel, even to Israeli people. I don't think anybody wants war. I don't think anybody wants instability. So I am in favor of any agreement, but I do hope the agreement is not very expensive. But I'm in favor of supporting any talks with our neighboring countries. As far as the Syrian government, they've demonstrated recently that they are willing to sit down with everyone and talk. I don't know whether they have open channel or not. Maybe they are, but any smart government, especially a new one, and especially one with like the current one in Syria today, I think they should. I think it's very wise and smart to engage with Syria, Jordan, Lebanon. They should engage with everyone, even Iran and Russia. They need to have diplomatic relations with everyone. And we need to learn how to live with each other peacefully.
Great answer. Thank you. Aliyah, this was a difficult and contentious question. I'm sorry to put you on the spot like this, but it's within the context of what we're talking about. Thank you. You've given us a good balanced answer. Thank you very much. Caroline, I'm going to jump from the Syrian-US perspective specifically into a little more regional deep dive. Since we've mentioned the Israelis, Israel is right now in, one of my guests actually last week, Dr. Samir Taqi, basically put it in a great kind of two-word phrase, Pax Israelica, kind of dominance, hegemony, in terms of like security, flexing its muscles, the boundaries of where Israel can basically go and hit has expanded not only towards Iran, but right now to supposedly moderate Arab counterparts, partners in peace, such as Doha. Tell me a little bit about what you think was how did the US administration view what happened in Doha? Was it in cahoots with the Israelis about this in terms of pre-approving this? Were they shocked? I don't think they were, but just to try and see, what was the US administration's position vis-a-vis what happened in Doha? And what does this mean to the regional image in which Syria is now going to be, because you said something about the Abrahamic Accords. If anything that I know, and if I know anything right now, I think in Abu Dhabi and Riyadh, somebody's scratching their heads and saying about those Abrahamic Accords, right? You know, like, do we really want to go through with this type of Israeli preponderance of excessive and wanton, unrestrained display of hegemony and violent coercive power? There, like, if Doha can be hit, we understand Tehran. There's an enmity here. We understand, you know, Hezbollah in Beirut. We understand them going behind, you know, the lines in Syria to hit this or that militia. It's unfair, it's illegal, whatever. But we understand it from a geopolitical power play. But to hit Doha is a bridge too far. So what say you?
Yeah, I think that this all comes down to a question with both the question about al-Shara, the question about, you know, HTS and this new administration, as well as, you know, on the flip side, the Israelis and these agreements that we could see ensue between both Tel Aviv and its regional counterparts. It all comes down to this question of, can someone truly change and abide by an agreement? And this has been a prevailing question, I think, you know, in the region in international relations, but especially now moving ahead, looking at the constellation of fronts that the Israeli government has added in addition to Gaza. And that has been something that has shocked the United States, which for years has operated on the premise of we only need one true proxy and one true country to completely embed our security ties with, and that is Israel, and that will serve as our singular proxy in the region. And as we've seen Israel expand its operations beyond the Gaza Strip, into Syria, into Lebanon, even into Yemen against the Houthis, and now, of course, we're seeing this recent strike against Qatar, in addition to direct strikes against Iran.
And tension, may I add, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt. I'm really sorry, but just to add on to this so that you can give us a fuller answer. And these recent tensions, this raising a tension several notches up with Egypt.
Yes, exactly. And this all has been met, I think, with subtle anticipation and certainly a degree of green lighting, but still shock from the United States government. And this goes for both the Biden administration as well as even the Trump administration. Recently, when Netanyahu and a delegation visited the White House, there were reports from staffers, both on the side of the United States as well as the Israelis, that there was tension in some of these meetings because the United States, at the end of the day, does not want a region-wide war to ensue. It does not want to see a spillover of tensions and major escalation beyond Gaza. It also, of course, wants there to be an end to this conflict in Gaza. And so as a result, this is going against the grain of what the United States wants. Now, how Syria comes into this is that the United States needs to diversify its partnerships in the region. It's why we've seen the United States, interface with the GCC. It's also why, to a degree, why the United States wants to create the Abraham Accords as a way to shut down Israeli overreach in the region. And I also think that for Syria, it sees an opportunity to occupy what was once a foothold for the Iranians, what was once a foothold for Russia, and create a partnership, not a foothold for U.S. direct military presence, but a foothold of influence with this new administration, trying to encourage change and really cultivate a partnership that could outlast U.S. presence in the region. And so that's really what I see unfolding. We're really seeing the United States shocked that the Israelis have overreached beyond Gaza. They've added so many fronts. And while the United States has supported this politically as well as through military assistance, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the result that they want in the region.
how big a sell is this to MAGA world, Caroline? Just before I go to Alia, just as a follow-up, how you're say you're Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? How can you sell this to the MAGA world? Because that's basically, let's put this, into perspective, right? This is a president who talks his base, right? This is all the universe that he cares about. Fox and Friends, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and beyond that, it's a void. So how does this sell to this crowd?
It's complicated because I think that on the one hand, while in the MAGA world and his platform particularly, which has advocated for disengagement abroad, and we saw Trump, for example, withdraw troops suddenly from northeast Syria in October 2019 to December 2019. We've also seen Trump periodically advocate for the disengagement through Operation Inherent Resolve in Iraq and Syria. There's a history of this. But at the same time, engagement and defense of Israel, and in some cases, the occasional deployment of U.S. military assets to the Mediterranean and into the region to defend Israeli interests, that has also happened in this administration. I think that we've started to see some fracturing. Marjorie Taylor Greene actually has started to change her positioning on U.S. support to Israel. We've also seen some other congressmen, not necessarily within the Republican Party, but also even within the Democratic Party, that has also defended Israel's operations into Gaza and throughout the region. They've also started to take a shift. There was actually a graphic I recently saw this morning, and I completely forget the statistics that were in it, but it also measured that U.S. public opinion within both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. It's also shifting in a different direction when it comes to support for Israel. So I think that we're at a crossroads here. I still think that the United States will push for a bilateral agreement between Israel and Syria. And I agree with Alia in the sense of, for the sake of stopping strikes, Israeli strikes into, for example, against the presidential palace or the Ministry of Defense in Syria, and also at risk of disrupting stability efforts in the south, we should see some sort of deconfliction agreement between the two countries and see also where talks can go and explore potential avenues of collaboration. But I do think that for now, there's a shift happening domestically within the United States, and who knows where we could be by the end of next year.
Cool. Thank you very much. That is very extensive. Alia, question about so we were observing the renaissance of the Syrian state from the ashes of the post-regime debris, basically. And we have, in this case, several regional players who are supposed allies of the new government in Syria. One of which was Qatar, which was hit by the Israelis recently in a very objectionable and criminal attack. To be honest, all our support to our Qatari friends and brethren, but also Turkey. Turkey has specific demands when it comes to Syria related to its own national security, specifically in the northeastern regions related to SDF. Now, as a Syrian American, my question to you is, what can the Syrian American community do to ease the tensions that seem to be persisting to date in the northeastern region? There's been an agreement that was signed on March the 10th, 2025, heralding a new era potentially of the Syrian state re-entering those areas after several years of absence. But then everything stalled, and after Suwaida, and again, I cannot sugarcoat this, the dismal performance of the Syrian state in terms of reestablishing Syrian state presence in that area in the Kurdish region right now, or in the Kurdish controlled region, to be more precise, sorry for the mistake, in northeastern Syria, there has been a hesitation on part of the SDF into going into an agreement. Turkey is certainly unhappy, and it's been using its leverage to kind of counter the move towards a Syrian-Israeli agreement in order to not lose out on its leverage to get things resolved in northeastern Syria. It's such a complex thing. I'm sorry, it sounds like a soup of influences, but this is how regional politics operate. My question to you is, as a Syrian American, is there a role? First of all, what's your expectation of the United States in this kind of, complexity? What do you want to see the United States do, if at all, do anything to get things moving in that direction? And then what can you, as a Syrian American community, possibly do to get things moving along in that sense, if you can?
Okay, well, the Syrian society, the Syrian social fabric in Syria is going through a very, very complex situation internally that is affecting all this tension on the borders with all neighboring countries, not only the northern side. Unfortunately, the previous regime, the Assad regime, has deliberately separated all the different components in Syria, all different ones, by using the divide and conquer rule. And there is a real tension among all components of Syrian community inside Syria, not just on the border, in every city, in every suburb. And what we need today as Syrian Americans and advocates is to help reconnect and reintegrate the social fabric among the Syrians inside Syria, and then hoping that would spill over to neighboring countries. We cannot solve this problem by just meeting and talking and discussing it. We actually need to get on the ground and engage with people on the ground. For many years, the Sunnis, the Alawites, the Druze, they have been so fragmented and divided, and each group was led to believe that the other one was living in peace and harmony while they suffered. But from what I have seen on the ground in Syria when I visited, is that every single component, especially the Christians and the Alawite, they live in very dire situation. Poverty is unimaginable. So all of them, they were not aware that they were all affected by the Assad regime, and not just the Sunnis, not the ones that were only displaced. Everyone was affected. So that's why we see a lot of tension inside Syria, and especially on the border. Now, what we need to do, again, is engage and open communication. We need humanitarian support, because a lot of the people who migrated back migrated to rubble. These people are going to migrate back to northern Syria. In the past 10 years, most of the refugee camps that were set up in the northern part of Syria. So what we need for the U.S. is support, economic support, social support, engagement. Again, rebuilding Syria requires reconnecting those communities. And once we start seeing some relief in this sense, then that will spill over to neighboring countries, and Turkey or Lebanon or Jordan or even Israel, they won't be on their toes as they are now. The situation now is still complex and is still very fragile, and therefore everybody is still tense and watching everything that's happening on the ground. But when stabilization starts kicking in, everybody can, just relax and not overreact over what's happening. But again, that's it.
We'll continue.
Thank you. I mean, it is quite a probing question. I was just trying to see your reaction to what this might be. Thank you. You've given me good information that I can build upon. I wanted to piggyback off of that. I keep doing this. I'm really manipulating this into something that makes me very happy. Thank you. Caroline, just to piggyback off of what Alia was saying, there are fractures in Syrian society that predate the Assad regime and that will live beyond the Assad regime in terms of sects, in terms of ethnicities, et cetera, et cetera. The Assad regime booby-trapped these internal fissures and made sure that they would blow up after it left. Some of them were miraculously saved, some of them combusted, and some of them actually actively were hurt by part of the learning curve, basically, of the current government in position. But my question is, can the United States have any role? We're talking about, again, the United States that's not in the nation building business anymore, that wants to cut off everything, drop the Middle East basically from its agenda and go and, duke it out with the Chinese for global hegemony. So it needs to just rearrange the decks. And then this is an administration that killed off US aid. Is there anything that the United States can kinetically, actively, on the grounds do to help rebuild forces of security, for example, regain administrative capacity in a state? If you've been to Damascus, and the state is gutted on the inside. They're like, ministries are just the facade of a ministry. Internally, there's absolutely nothing happening. And the poor ministers that I know are just working with whatever they can to just keep the patchwork going. This is how bad it is. So can the United States have a role in that? And then in social rehegemonization, in social peace, capacity, anything. Is there a role that the United States can play? And more importantly, is it willing to?
It's a great question. I think absolutely there's a role that the United States can have, and also, in my personal opinion, should have, without creeping into this territory and in some cases habit of American-backed nation-building initiatives, like we saw, for example, in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think that the United States can assist along 3 lines. Number 1 is having patience. Number 2 is offering advisory support, which is not nation building. It's not, staging U.S. troops on the ground and, mapping out a blueprint of a new governance structure, but advising, providing experts, providing, governmental personnel to be on the ground and engage continuously with the new administration, as well as engage with Syrian civil society organizations and the Syrian people. And then finally is material support, which all of this is tied to sanctions relief and the repeal of Caesar Act. For example, how can the United States help with, and I'll throw out the example of counter-narcotics in Syria. The Syrian Interior Ministry gutted, as you mentioned. The Assad regime, they burned most of the documents about seizures. They have a very low-level staff. They're working around the clock into the very, last hours of the night and into the morning. And they have a graduating class of just a few hundred police officers. The United States can provide experts. Their, State Department INL Bureau or the DEA could certainly pass along best practices, engage a bit more with the Interior Ministry and Anti-Narcotics Directorate. And then in terms of material support, that's where X-ray machines, night goggles, canine sniffer dogs all come in, but it is inherently tied to sanctions relief. And so when we see some of the initiatives that, for example, Lawler, but especially with Lindsey Graham, those initiatives that have been introduced where they tie these to very vague conditions of, of course, tolerance to minority groups, the combating and the complete fight against ISIS, and concluding that fight against ISIS is one of the expectations and conditions with the this congressional initiative. And that's something that the United States needs to understand, that the new administration cannot do alone. It needs support. It needs material support. It needs patience. We're not even a year into this new moment in Syria.
Which
So
is
the
asking
expectation,
much of this particular administration, isn't it? Patience is not a virtue that the Trump administration has an amount of, is it?
no, none whatsoever. And we've seen that, of course, now with negotiations over Gaza. We've seen it, in a number of different contexts. And yes, I think that, there might be, not to put it too simplistically, but I think that Trump in many ways thought that the April announcement was all it would take. Right. We make the announcement that sanctions would be relieved, and that's, voila, we have this new
Where's
moment.
my Nobel Peace Prize? Thank you.
Right, exactly. And then we can withdraw our troops on time by September 2026, and there we go. Instead, we're going to have patience with this new administration, provide them the tools that they need, still keep these expectations and conditions in place. And there are many incentives that we can have to condition this new administration to be more open and tolerant of minority groups, and to, by every means, not repeat the same mistakes that we saw by the former regime. But that requires, it's a two-way street with the United States government, as well as other partners in the region. We need to see engagement.
Last question to you, Caroline, and then I'm going to conclude with Alia. I would love for this to continue for another 3 hours, but A, you've had enough of me, and B, it's too much to do on a Saturday, and 3, Alia needs to head on a plane and be on her way to save the world. To save the world. So I want to just ask you this question, Caroline. In your honest opinion, again, you're not part of the administration. You're just a policy wonk, and a very expert policy wonk at that. And I defer to you, really. But my question is, does the American administration truly trust this new regime? Or will it be able to, in reality, ever certainly trust this new regime in Damascus enough? Will we be seeing in a week's time, year end, a real shift into a true sort of honeymoon in that sense, where not only is it good words and nice photo ops and Tom Barrack speaking glowingly of Syria's new direction and what have you, but then also, to be honest, seeing dollars flow into Syria, seeing investment in terms of material equipment and real budgets going into Syria. Is this a thing that we can and should expect, or is this a pipe dream?
It's a great question. I think that when it comes to trust, number one, that's contingent on time engaging and how deep the relationships we can build in Syria with the new administration. And it's also dependent on different individuals in the administration. I think if you ask Tom Barrack, for example, Ambassador Tom Barrack, he would say yes, he has that degree of trust. When you talk about also individuals in the new administration, for example, individuals like Qutaiba Idlibi, as well as other members where I think you.
I had the distinct honor and pleasure to have as my first interviewee.
Yep, he launched this whole series with you, and I think that was a really great example of, this is someone who has engaged with U.S. policymakers, and I think U.S. policymakers very much trust, and they're acquainted with many of these individuals that have been in academia and civil society organizations and think tanks that know how they're thinking about Syria and U.S. policy towards Syria. But as a whole, I think it's going to take some time to get to trust. I think that a year is too little time to say that the United States inherently trusts this new administration in Syria. But it also requires that Syria, once and hopefully if sanctions are fully repealed, we also have to see how this new administration spends and uses that new space of leverage and engages with U.S. companies and uses new humanitarian aid flows and how they, essentially act and behave in this new space. That will be another test. But that is not means for the United States to completely give up and disengage on the Syria file.
Thank you. But just a follow-up question. Do you think Tom Barrack is a plenipotentiary? Or does he act? Because it sounds to me that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is kind of like AWOL when it comes to Syria. He's like the last person to know anything or last person to be interested. It's all Tom Barrack. To us in the region, sounds like Tom Barrack, Trump. There's no in between. Is that a good perception, or is that us just over remembering colonial times and plenipotentiaries and stuff like that?
I do think that he has a lot of agency over
latitude, right?
Yeah, over latitude over specifically affairs having to do with the Levant. But when it comes to counterterrorism, that switches over very quickly into the arena and the remit of Sebastian Gorka over at the National Security Council. So always we see this with every administration, right? Like there's always these competing orbs of influence and overlap. Not to say that Ambassador Tom Barrack has not been active and vocal on, for example, U.S. drawdown in Syria, but when it comes to Iraq, it's a whole different thing. I do think that Tom Barrack right now has overwhelming influence over affairs and also very clearly enthusiasm over this new moment in Syria. And so, hopefully voices like that can play a role in keeping up momentum. But at the same time, in this sort of administration where things can go so differently and so quickly, it's very difficult to ascertain, whether his voice will win out.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. Alia, you will have the last word. Where do you, as a Syrian American, as a Syrian woman specifically, want to see Syria in 2026? Where do you think it's headed? Not like where do you want it? So where are your hopes? But where also do you think it is actually going, following UNGA, following the United Nations General Assembly in 2026 and the 5 years beyond? Where you want it and where you think it's going? And are they one and the same, or is there a divergence?
I hope they both are. Well, I certainly hope to see, yes, I certainly hope to see reconstruction in the next coming year. Well, first of all, let's start with the removal of the sanction. I really do hope that we see a complete repeal of the Caesar Act, a complete lift of all these sanctions, so that to allow people to start investing and returning to Syria to rebuild. I would like to see Syria in 2026 at least starting the rebuilding process. Right. Today, Syrians, we do not need a honeymoon phase. I think we've had enough of that celebration. What we need today is not just symbolic gestures. We need to move from geopolitics to people. We need action. We need people on the ground. As Carolina mentioned, we need to extend an arm to the current government in Syria. Without financial and economic support, they're not going to be able to hire more security officers. They're not going to be able to renovate border buildings, structure. We need to lend them a helping hand. We need to engage with them. We need to support them, whether cautiously, of course, but we could still do that and be able to, control the narrative. So what I would like to see is reconstruction. I think the U.S. has spent over $17 billion in aid to Syria in the past decade, but only 1%, only 1% hit the ground, and mainly hit the ground in tents, in form of tents, not actual reconstruction, not infrastructure, did not create any additional jobs on the ground. Only 1%. However, Syrian Americans there's a study that says sends 1.6 billion yearly to family members. And that tells you we do not want financial support. I mean, we would appreciate financial support, but what we need is policy. That's all we need. We need construction, we need governance, and we need support. So once we have all that in place, the Syrian people all over the world, the Syrian diaspora, is able and willing to help their families and to help their country rebuild. We just need the support to that. 2027, 28, I hope that a lot of us would return home. Everybody wants to go home. In the past decade, I've had the honor and the privilege to work among resilient Syrian women that I would like to highlight. And myself, among 5 ladies in SAP, we've organized a trip.
Could you please mention me? Please.
Name? Oh,
yes,
of
please.
course. My pleasure. Back in January, right after the fall of the regime, myself amongst 5 resilient ladies from SAP, Dr. Reem Al-Bizm, Ruba Hashim, Dr. Sarab Al-Fata, Hind Al-Hannawi from Humanitarian Tracker, and Dr. Azza Abdel Haq, we brought together a group of remarkable, great Syrian women, not just from the US, from all over Canada. We had someone from Europe, from the Gulf area, and organized a trip back home and to reconnect, of course, with our homeland after being away for so many years. And we actually coordinated our trip logistics on a WhatsApp group called On the Road to Damascus, which was amazing. When we arrived, we were thrilled and overcome by emotions. It was a surreal moment to be back. But the excitement faded shortly after we arrived, because we visited a town just a few miles out of the city center in Damascus, Jobar,
Yes.
fully destructed on the ground. It was unbelievable, surreal. But we had also, our main purpose of the visit was to actually meet the president and connect with the local government on the ground. We were so excited because that never happened before during the Assad regime. So we requested an audience with the president, and we were the first and only women delegation to do so, and it was quite the experience. We had one clear goal. We wanted to show both the new government and the world and the international community that the Syrian women are diverse. They're educated, they're capable, they're smart, and yes, and most importantly, they are leaders. I mean, from working with them in the past decade, they are not only professionals, but they have a voice in policy too. All these advocates, all these ladies that worked in advocacy, they've done a tremendous job advocating for Syria in the past 10 years. And I would like to highlight Dr. Reem Al-Bizm, a cardiologist based in New Jersey. She directly influenced the US policy by helping avert a major military strike on Idlib. And I believe everyone have heard this story. And she'd done that through experience, credibility, and quiet diplomacy. Syrian women today are not just homemakers. They are doctors, lawyers, investors, businesswomen, educators.
Leaders.
Yes, and they are all eager to go back home and help. I think the new government has a real opportunity in Syria and a responsibility to actively engage with these women, not just symbolically, but and not in name only, but in a meaningful way, because Syrian women can be policymakers, can govern, can even rebuild. I work in construction, so I love reconstruction. I love building.
So you're an underachiever, Alia.
Now, I love, design and homes and rooms and stuff. So Syrian women cannot, we cannot afford to sideline them and keep them on the side and put them in a corner in the government.
Yes.
They do not belong in a corner. Absolutely not. They belong in the center of decision making. They can engage, they can educate, and they can lead. And if given the opportunity, these women can go home, and they are eager actually to go home and actually help. But for now, the situation on the ground is not very accommodating. So that's why we have not seen enough people turn and rush back to help. So what I would hope to see in the future is more engagement and more opportunity for Syrians to be able to help their homeland.
Excellent, Maria. I mean, you've said it all. You've summed it up. I am very glad, again, very humbled. As a Syrian, as a brown Syrian man, ego is cut down to size right now with the presence of two brilliant women who have a lot to say, who've told us a lot, who've elucidated some of the things that I had questions about. I could spend all of this afternoon with you. I would think we would have to have a repeat sometime soon, if you're so willing, if you've not been bored out of your brains enough. We would love to have this done again. I would love to host you guys on another talk about other aspects to see how Alia has gone to New York and saved the world. Let's hope. Because no biggie, that's all you need to do in the coming week, Alia. Just save the world, please.
I will do my best.
Thank you very much for this great afternoon, for this brilliant conversation, for your incisive answers, and for your kindness to accept coming to this Mountada Debate. I'm very, very happy and very proud to have hosted this. Thank you, Caroline, for everything. And Alia, good luck. Good luck. Break a leg, not your own, at New York. Thank you very much for watching Mountada Debate. We'll be
Looking forward
back
to meeting you in New York, Caroline.
Yeah, I'll see you and probably so many others too, Syrian Americans in New York. Thank you so much, Jamal, for having us.
Have a shawarma on me, okay?
Yeah, we will.
Thank you very much for watching Mountada Debate this week. We're going to be back in a couple of weeks, hopefully discussing post-UNGA issues. And yeah, keep on watching Mountada Debate for more interesting guests and interesting and incisive discussions about Syria.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, shukran.
All right. Thank you very much, Caroline.
Thank you, Jamal.
This was a blast.
Absolutely.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. I'll reach out to you now that I have your WhatsApp. I'm gonna reach out to you about a few things that I just had top of mind. Unfortunately, I have to run, but thanks so much once again, and let me know if there's anything I can do. And thanks so much, Tasneem, and everyone on